Let's not talk about identification issues yet, but just based upon the facts other than identification, your opinion, who thinks it's a hate crime? Who thinks it's not a hate crime? Okay. That's a much easier one, because why? Because we actually have the suspect focusing in on what he believes to be the victim's religion, and because the victim is actually engaging in his prayers openly for someone to a passerby to see that this person is practicing his faith. And what we also look at, again, when we look at all the surrounding circumstances, could there be some other reason why this person is attacking the victim? Did the victim, stare at or refer to in gang language as mad dog? Or did he, do something to give him any reason why someone would act out? Would you want to know in this case what the mental stability is of the attacker? Do you think that's the factor? In fact, in this case, there was some mental illness with the offender. And I will tell you, in probably about a third of my 30% or so of my cases, there is some documented mental history, mental illness history. Well, we do have some of those where they actually have swastikas all over the body, but they also are somewhat crazy. So how does that factor in? When it's clear that they definitely have this ideology, but it's also clear that they have some problems with their mental. So in this case, obviously, that's something that's going to probably be a factor in sentencing for the judge. If they determine, okay, he was a fainted offender, and you're asking yourself, was a substantial motivation for the physical attack? Was that based upon a bias, prejudice towards the victim, the victim's Muslim religion? And we pretty much wholeheartedly agree it was, but now that's up to the judge to determine how I factor in the mental instability of this attacker. How do I determine what the punishment is? Obviously, we want attackers, especially if they have mental instability, to receive some mental help for we want them to, when they get out of custody, to be better citizens, to be able to deal with the mental issues. We can't always guarantee that, but we try in the system with our limited resources. But now we have the identification issue. Now, how do you perceive that? Would you charge the perpetrator based upon now the victim indicating uncertainty, where he had only a few seconds to identify the attacker? What if it was nighttime? Experts will come in and talk about cross-racial identification being more difficult when the attacker is different race than the victim in the back.
Is it possible that the victim, as a taxi driver, is afraid to get into it from a legal standpoint, or identify him, or had a second thought that, hey, I'm operating a taxi driver, this guy could be a member of a gang or a member of some organized group, and I want to feed my family, and I don't want to continue with this.
That's an excellent point, and we talked about that as far as some of the problems, challenges of hate crimes in general, fear of retaliation. And we'll want to do a face-to-face with that victim to try to size up, is that victim doing it because he honestly has doubts, or is it because of some fear of retaliation? Or just wants it to go away? You report to the police, but now he has to come to court, is going to be asked to identify the perpetrator. Is there some fear that he fears, again, like you said, this attacker has friends, maybe he's in a documented hate group, right? Maybe a victim has small children. He's fearful especially in our current technology-based society, that people can find people when people harm. Even those in law enforcement have those concerns that people can find out where you live. So yes, there is counsel. Honestly, he doesn't want to wrongly accuse somebody, but regardless, once that person starts expressing uncertainty, especially if there's nothing physical to tie the attacker in, other than he's found in a park a few blocks away, is a transient, and he generally matches the suspect description. But again, it goes to show you how one other fact may change the whole equation, how you look at this case. Do you want to know the suspect's history? Does he have a history? Does he have any other hate crime offenses? Or just crimes of violence? Does he happen to have a Bible with him? Does he have something written inside the Bible, a religious book, to suggest he has a bias towards persons of different religions? That type of thing. This case, I did file as a hate crime. And because of the problems with identification, either the victim just being so honest and just being so careful, he didn't want to wrongly accuse the one person, we allowed the suspect to take a lesser plea. And he did serve some time in custody. So sometimes we'll never know. I mean, did he take that because he just wanted to get out of jail, but he wasn't? Or did he take it because we have to factor in what do we think a jury of 12 people are going to do? So that's why we have often take, a lesser plea or a guaranteed number of custody days, because we may end up with nothing at the end of it, because the jury may feel the same way. He expressed some doubt about the identification, and so the person walks away scot-free, as opposed to having something on his record for future. Scenario number 3. In the early morning hours, employees at a local Jewish synagogue arrived to work to find the entrance sign has been spray painted in red with graffiti. The graffiti consists of the numbers 1488. The employees immediately call the police, who find similar tagging on a few fences belonging to residents in the immediate area. Now, does it matter at all that neighborhood fences were also tagged with similar 1488? And you know what 1488 means? 88 we talked about in the presentation. 14 stands for the mantra, especially for hardcore, the mission offender types, the hardcore hate mongers. We must secure the existence of, basically, for our white children, something along those lines. And it tends to be more associated with more the hardcore, especially within the white supremacy movement. But does it matter that there were fences tagged? Let's say that it was fences of people who were not Jewish, just people in the area who live in the area. Does that cause any concern whether or not, if we can determine that was the same person, be it by the type of lettering and the color of the paint, and we assumed it was the same person. And unfortunately, in this case, it happened about at least 4 times, I believe, at that temple over about a 4-month period. To my knowledge, FBI was great to come in to also help set up surveillance cameras. To my knowledge, no one was caught in that case, so it still is an open case. But let's say it was not at a temple. It was just in the neighborhood, 1488. Is that a hate crime? Without determining any of the residents were of the Jewish faith, is that a hate crime? Going in that direction, then we say we find the perpetrators and we charge them as a hate crime. But these are the types of questions we have to ask. It's not always cut and dry. And that's another reason it's great to have the media here as well. Because this demonstrates that oftentimes in these cases, part of the reason we started these community events recently, with the last few years, is because there's sometimes the story comes out in the media and all the public hears is the one, sometimes the victim speaking, which on first blush it looks like absolutely that's an outrageous hate crime. Why aren't the authorities being more aggressive? Why aren't they making arrests? And believe me, if that was the entire story, yes, I would agree with you, but oftentimes there's a lot of details, which it's just the nature of these cases. We don't try the cases in the press. We have the other facts we have to investigate, to determine that during the investigation we may find out there was a relationship between the parties. There was something else going on. Yes, these ugly things were said about the victim's religion or race, but there was also some other underlying reasons for the attack. Doesn't make it right. Maybe it's still a crime, but just one change in one of these facts may turn it from a hate crime to not a hate crime. When we find substantial motivation was actually something else. I had a case recently where it was an African American who had married into a white supremacist family. And the attacker would have been in prison before, he had tattoos for white supremacy, swastikas. And it looked like a hate crime because at first blush, he was calling the victim a bunch of racial slurs. He didn't like the fact, it looked like it was obvious he didn't like the fact he married his sister. But they're all living in the same home, in the parents' home. And sort of threatened him with a knife. And we find out later during the investigation, after he's arrested for a hate crime, that the person he called for help to get him out of the house was African American. And when I talked to the victim a few weeks later, he says he made up with his brother-in-law. And they never had any problems about race. And he didn't want us to pursue hate crime charges. And the attacker had been drunk at the time. It was really about inter-family problems. But yes, he wasn't about white supremacists, but he made exceptions for certain people, like his friend who picked him up to get away before the police arrived. So these cases can get very complicated. But again, you know, we appreciate the press coming and giving attention to these cases. We want the word to go out. We want San Diego to know that law enforcement and community-based organizations want to aggressively hold the perpetrators accountable when it is a hate crime. But we also want the community to know that, you know, only getting one side of it, you know, the sound bites and victims, there may be more to the story. And oftentimes, unfortunately, there may not be follow-up. We'll never know what really happened to that case. So it an outrageous hate crime, but we just don't have that follow-up with the story. So that's, again, depends on the circumstances. You may recall the one slide I had where if you're targeting a specific person, as opposed to, you know, just saying in general, I don't like this particular people of this faith, but say somebody walks by and that person starts targeting the audience and directing violence to that person, that's where it crosses the line. But it's a challenging area, because then if there are arrests made, and that person can sue the government, sue the police, and the police are in a very delicate situation of wanting to enforce the rules and order.
One of the importance, and he mentioned a hate incident earlier, the reason we need those recorded is it's a documented trail. And it can help solve some of these cases down the road, or help show that there's a history of the hate. And so, because these incidents can be real hard to prove as a hate crime, but if there's a documented history, we can help build up to this and show a pattern. But if people don't tell us about it, it doesn't do us any good. With 18 years patrol, I'll go up to people and talk to them, and they'll say, oh yeah, 8 years ago this happened. I can't really help you with something that happened 8 years ago. We need you to come forward and tell us. The department is working hard on training all of our officers so they can recognize hate. When people think bullying, they think they're kids. Adults can be bullied. They can be bullied at work. They can be bullied by neighbors. They can be bullied because of their religion or their beliefs or whatever. So we need people to be strong enough to come forward and say, this isn't right. Is it a crime, or is it something I can just report? And we can start building on that. Show a history of something that maybe. We've got a case that just came out a month ago. A young girl, 16, killed herself. I don't know if you guys saw this. She was online a couple years prior to that. Some guy online convinced her to flash herself and have her picture taken. He then took that photo of her topless and sent it to all her friends at school. She was emotionally distraught, left that school. He tracked her to another school, sent the picture around to that school. At this point, she killed herself. Is it a crime? You know, are the laws in place? I mean, obviously,
step on Oscar's toes or San Diego PD's toes or the sheriff's office in connection with anything that they're doing. Many times the FBI and law enforcement, local and state law enforcement, will hear about the incident at the same time, but generally speaking, it's state and local law enforcement that takes the first call, takes the call about the assault, takes the call about the arson, takes the call about some kind of gang violence that's motivated by hate. And from there, it can be reported to perhaps the FBI, and the FBI gets involved in connection with that. We need to work with our military police partners from other people on the military bases to be sure that they know they have an avenue to report those type of violations and those kind of crimes. Absolutely, it should not just be swept under the rug or something that the military will handle themselves. They obviously do handle a lot of that. But hopefully what happens with the federal government that's different is there'll be an opportunity for us, perhaps in a scenario in which this organization or this group crosses into another county, crosses into another state, or somehow has the resources that kind of go back and forth and support whatever type of hate it might be. And we're talking about hate that's based on a person's religion or some of their cultural customs in connection with their religion. if that's something that can be looked into on a greater basis, then that's the kind of thing that the federal government does get involved in. But at the same time, there will be opportunities for us to do crimes as well. I think one of the big focuses here in San Diego by our office have been some of the white supremacist groups and some of the actions that they're taking. And we've tracked some of those groups that not only are they here in our own county, but they're in other counties here in California as well as other states surrounding California. And that's where the federal government, because we have FBI agents across the nation, we can work and look at an investigation like that. Sometimes local, state and local law enforcement will ask us to get involved in a case like that. And that's when we can work in partnership with the state and local law enforcement as well.
We get calls about hate incidents. For example, someone handing out some type of hate paraphernalia, literature out on the streets. Well, we get calls. We document that. We want to make sure that there might not be a trend coming around the corner. They might be targeting someone in the area. We also receive calls from various religious groups, community associations out there letting us know, did you see what happened on the news? I just want you guys to be aware because it might happen over here. That's always good. So we have a radar on, kind of looking out worldwide, nationwide, what's going on, because you never know what may affect us here locally.
As a member of the San Diego Human Relations Commission, I'm the only person on this panel that cannot arrest you, investigate you, or prosecute you. What we try to do is change your mind. And to your point about changing the minds of people who commit hate crimes, to us, and that's kind of almost too late because the act has been committed. Not that you shouldn't have the programs like you described, but think about this for a minute. For over 100 years, this country had a violent terrorist organization operating semi-openly in the United States. It was called the Ku Klux Klan. And the reason the Ku Klux Klan existed for 100 years is not just because of the haters and the white capes and the burning crosses, it's because those friendly newspaper editors, those police chiefs, those insurance salesmen, those teachers tolerated them, gave them cover, gave them support, and aid and comfort. Those are the people that are responsible for the Ku Klux Klan. It's not necessarily just the Klan members. So what we in the League and what we in the Human Relations Commission League try to do is to make sure you guys know that the role that you have to stand up and oppose this when you're at a cocktail party, when you're driving to work, when you're doing these things, just a normal part of your daily life, and people start talking about ways that, you know, this is really creepy, you know, maybe I don't want to ride with this guy, but if you don't stand up and say something politely, doesn't mean we get in a fight in the car or whatever, but there's got to be up to us to stand up to, because, you know, hate crimes go in a kind of a trajectory. It starts out with a thought. Well, we can't make thought illegal, right? But then it gets to expression, whether it's on the internet or, you know, just at a bar. Expression is not illegal either, but it's the next step before taking, you know, making a threat. And I may say, I really don't like the media, and you're a jerk because you're in the media. Well, see, you got that. Okay. Yeah. But if I start threatening you, that's
basis that actually is available to everybody here, especially with the internet. The statistics are based upon the Attorney General's report. If you Google San Diego Attorney General's office, and it goes back to about 10 years since California is actually one of the better states for mandatory reporting. We are unique in San Diego, unlike many other cities, large cities in our country, that we share a great working relationship that preceded when I came on board doing this. It's something that's been built up over generations, that we have a close working relationship, not just within federal, state, county, but also with the community organizations that identify for opportunities to use the media. We love the media here, taking an interest in this particular area of types of crimes. Absolutely, the media is such an integral partner towards prevention. I mean, if we have the right people who have that thinking, like Jacob Gog is here, who has a lot of discretion, and that news station has a lot of discretion on what stories that we can run, you know, what kind of views it takes. And that's part of the benefit of living here in San Diego, that we have this relationship where we're all committed towards the same goal of preventing these cases. And obviously, if it's occurred, to making sure someone's held accountable for what they've done.